Welcome back, everybody, to Realitychecktv. This is the second episode, and we just want to get started right away. We got a late start today, but I think it's important that we at least get a quick show in before we do anything, especially with this national election coming up. I feel it's indicative that we just put out a little information and try to go through some of this misinformation that we've been receiving for so long. Before I get started though, first and foremost, giving all honor and praise to the creator of the heavens and the earth. Thank him for his prophets, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Thank him for Moses. Thank him for Yeshua. We thank him for Prophet Muhammad ibn Abdullah. And if we thank him for those men, we have to thank him for the legends that came in our time period. We thank him for Ben Ami al-Mashiach. We thank him for honorable, most honorable Elijah Muhammad. Thank him for honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. I see Shalia, Prince ICO Ben Israel, and all those who seek truth, justice, and equality for our people. I want to greet you in the words of peace. Shalom, shalom. Well, getting right to it, because we only got so much time today before we have to wrap up, but I just want to cover some things that I think that we just gotta talk to today. And one of the things that's been going on in the news is how Trump has been talking about the rigging of these national elections. So let's start off with the article. This is the most recent one that Trump was accused, the Democrats, of voter fraud in Nevada, which is in a Hispanic precinct. And it goes to say, Donald Trump has long suggested without evidence that there is voter fraud in the United States. Explicitly accused the Democrats in Nevada in engaging in this practice on Saturday. This is recent. Speaking in the convention center hall in Reno, Nevada, Trump alleged that the long lines of Hispanic neighborhoods on the last day of early voting in Las Vegas was the result of the machines of crazy, broken Harry Reid and the political machine, referring to the Senate minority leader, who fails to bring action to this policy. So this, for a number of reasons, can be extremely dangerous. One, Trump really isn't that off about the history of America and the rigging of elections, which is a practice that was really instituted for local governmental positions, whether it be council members, aldermen, mayors, things like that, or even state level representatives, judges, these type of things. Reason why it was put in place, because unlike the general election, for the President of the United States, you can't control the outcome as easy as you can on a more local level. But Donald Trump knows that already. He's just really a pawn in this game, but he's put in for a particular reason to bring forth a lot of the sentiments that the American populace have been laying dormant publicly for the last couple decades. And now you can see the visceral hate that they have, people of color, for people that they feel affect their original old American way, a way that gives them some type of superiority because of their skin. And that's what Trump brings to the surface now, because we're going into a time where we're definitely going to have to understand the realities of a war on a mass level. And a lot of people use the term race war, but it's even deeper than that, because it's really a war for humanity. It's a war against morality, against the actualities and practices of justice, peace, and equality, versus total chaos, total devastation, death. That's what this war is going to be waged upon. And color is going to be used as the front kind of basis on why it will be started. But Trump saying in this particular Hispanic community that this is the reason. So now he's creating this disdain between the white European populace, especially his voting bloc, versus the Hispanics, the minorities, however you want to call them, that creates this confrontation. And we already see what's happening against black men and women in this country, the unarmed shootings of black men and women, the mass incarceration and other effects that they're facing every single day. So now it's time to bring other on a mass level. Don't get me wrong, Hispanics face the same, not at the level that black people do, but they face a mass level intimidation and ostracism in this country, as well as other demographics. But now it's time to bring it to more in the forefront. Why is that a reality? Because now you're going to create these fractional pieces going against each other. So it's going to be the Hispanics who won't go on the blacks in this, the poor whites, or the not necessarily even poor, but just the whites who don't want to give up their way of life, or they feel they lost their way of life, and using the presidency of Obama as an excuse. This is systematically put in place. But the rigging of elections has been something that's been happening for years. And I want to just cover that for a second because I'm only dealing with a little limited time. But first I wanted to go to, since I'm here in Chicago at the present moment, how Chicago has handled its rigging of elections. See, a lot of people don't know that Richard Daley, or what Chicago knows, Papa Daley, helped orchestrate the manipulation and the rigging of the presidential election here in Chicago so that his Irish brother, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, will be able to win the presidential election. And this is one of the things that's been well documented, but people don't ever really speak about. But I'm just going to read a quick article that everybody can look up. And also, there's a book that talks immensely about it. It's called American Pharaoh, about Mayor Richard J. Daley, his battle for Chicago and the nation. It's a great read. Gives a lot of information. And like I said, I always want to have receipts so people can be able to look this stuff up for themselves. Because you got to have the information, you got to have the knowledge. Otherwise, it's just rhetoric. But this is something that I didn't write. This is something, Black Man, these is his European brothers and sisters that wrote this. Adam Cohen and Elizabeth Taylor, who co-wrote it to bring forth this information. And it's well documented. You can go into and look it up. But just reading this article as it pertains to Trump. Excuse me, get the real music back on. So it says, as it relates to what's going on with Trump, you can still vote early in Chicago, but voting often is pretty much a thing of the past. Some experts say Chicago is famous for its history of people voting from the grave and for helping President John F. Kennedy steal the 1960 election, which in the year he beat Richard Nixon, who eventually ended up becoming president anyway. See, it's really all a game. Once you understand, you just got to wait your turn. They're going to give you a plan for the way, similar to how Hillary had to take a back seat for 8 years for President Obama, but this is all part of the plan. It says 9,000 votes in Illinois by capturing, it says JFK beat Richard Nixon by 9,000 votes in Illinois by capturing what some considered a suspiciously high 450,000 vote advantage in Cook County. Officials insisted voter fraud had largely dispensed in Chicago, but Donald Trump, the Republican presidential candidate, said that voter fraud happened in Chicago, as well as it's happening to him now. The city's election history is crazier than most people realize, though with the Republican feuds leading to homes being bombed and names being stolen from the tombstones just to get extra votes for the Democratic machine. Now you gotta hear this. It says Republicans found evidence leading to their homes being bombed and names being stolen from the tombstones just to get extra votes for the Democratic machine. The extent in which they did what they went for John F. Kennedy to be able to get this presidential election. The city's old reputation is true, or at least partially true, says Dick Sampson, a political science professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And then he goes in to list other things. During 1928 primary election, shootings and bombings were often used to frighten and eliminate opponents. That election, which saw 2 political figures killed and 62 bombings, including one at the home of Senator and Cook County State's Attorney candidate. Now, that's just a couple of examples of how the extent that people are willing to go to maintain control and dominance. Also, for people know whoever watch Baba Dick Gregory, understand about the time in 1968, just 8 years later, how the electronic voting machines gave him over 9 million votes in Pennsylvania. And he was a fourth party candidate, a write-in candidate, which they end up correcting. I just want to read an article from it real quick. Let's see where I can find this article. Just want to read one quick to you, just to show you the extent of what we're facing. Here goes one. And this was the Washington Post. It says, Republican Richard M. Nixon was elected the 37th President of the United States today and won an immediate pledge of support from the Democratic candidate at the time, who was Hubert Humphrey, the man he narrowly defeated. Capping a remarkable political comeback, Nixon surged to the White House on the crest close of a wind-up victories in California, his native state, Illinois, and Ohio. Through the long night after the polls closed, Nixon and Humphrey were at a virtual deadlock, and they were nearly tied in the popular vote. And I tell people all the time that the popular vote, which the vote that we participate in, does not elect the President of the United States of America. It's the Electoral College. And they like to use the excuse, well, whoever wins the popular vote of the state, those electoral votes go to the candidate. But that's not always the case. It's not always the case, but that's something for another show. But it goes to say, is this the one I need to read? Let's read Nixon, man. 55-year-old former vice president. This isn't the one that talks about it, I don't think. Okay. Here you go, Dick Gregory.
The two-party system is so corrupt and immoral, they cannot solve the problems confronting the masses of the people in this country. I did agree to accept the nomination in various states from independent organizations who had already had a position on the ballot, and this is why I have accepted.
Well, it goes a little further into what happened to Dick Gregory and how he was able to win those 9 million votes because the machine was rigged for Nixon, but because it was a mechanical mishaps, it ended up every time they went to go punch in or it was supposed to hit Nixon's name, it went to Dick Gregory. That's one occasion where it went wrong, but how they use these voting machines to manipulate the voting polls. But going on to my next thing. Staying on that line, I want to just talk about some of the things that happened in the news. And one of the things that people wanted me to talk about is the Lil Wayne incident, where he talked about Black Lives Matter and how Black lives don't matter to him. Only thing that matters to him is that he's able to let me get corrected right. That Black lives, he never heard of the concept Black Lives Matter, something that he's foreign to, and racism doesn't exist in America. And he also went to say that Black lives do matter to white people because he's a living testimony, because if Black lives didn't matter to white people, he wouldn't be rich. So just showing you the mindset of those people that they put in front of the screen. And you can say, okay, Lil Wayne be high, drunk all the time, or he's cooning. But that's a dangerous thing to put out there, because you have a lot of people that listen to these rappers, these actors, these entertainers, and they take their words fully to the extent of what they're saying. So they're not really breaking down the other variables that go into why he said that, what made he say that, but they're going to take him literally. And so when you have something like that, a rhetoric out there that's so dangerous, because even though he was just saying anything, and those who have any type of intellect can see that, he was probably high off, whatever he's high off of, drunk, whatever the case may be. The younger audience, especially come up now, looks at that as reality. And a lot of the things and the trends that we're seeing, but those people are systematically put in place for a particular reason. It is to steer the narrative, to take it off of what's really happening, and to make us feel more comfortable with the atrocities that we're facing. We talked about Richard J. Daley earlier. One person that he had was a guy named William Dobson, which also talked about in the book that I was showing you earlier. And he was one that people would call now a coon, but he directly affected the narrative of how black voters, especially here in Chicago, reacted to a lot of the atrocities that Daley put in place during his run as the mayor of Chicago. And you gotta have these faces to kind of suppress the fight of the oppressed people. So you give them these token figures and these token positions to lull the revolutionary spirits to sleep. So you got two practices that they use. They either kill you off or they buy you off, and those who they bought off, they use to kind of separate that spirit of revolutionary, evolutionary fight from them by telling them that they're the problem and that the society is one that is fair and just. And that's what William Dobson represented. That's what people like Lil Wayne and the comments that he made represent today. And that's why we're going into a situation now that we got to understand that we're fighting for our very lives at this particular moment. So whether Hillary wins or Trump, we have to put a plan together. People have to put a plan together. What is going to be our reality next? Because if we keep accepting one that has been pushed on us, it's being forced on us and created for us, it's going to keep us in a perpetual cycle that we are in now. And that is one of total death and devastation. And I'm saying the word not likely because that's what we face every day. The lynchings are just as real as they were in the end of the 1800s and the early 1900s, all the way to the 60s and 70s. It's just lynching just means a mass killing or a killing without a just trial. So it doesn't have to be a hanging, but being gunned down in the streets are lynchings. So when we look at this thing for what it really is versus the scripted narrative that's been presented for us, now we can really process what needs to be done. And so before I get off, I wanted to talk about our brother that was a revolutionary, evolutionary spirit in Africa during the 1980s in a West African country. His name was Thomas Sankara. And Thomas Sankara was the president who came into power in 1985 during really the end of the real push outside of South Africa, but we see how that ended up. The real push for independent nations in Africa. And even though they so-called got their sovereignty, what the European powers did at that time was influence the government by controlling the resources that were still in their land. So now you may have a black face in the government, whether it be the president or the prime minister of the country, but the strings that were still being pulled were still by whatever country had controlled it previously to their independence. And so a lot of times we had these puppet leaders that were misleading and taking advantage of the populace that inhabited those countries and those regions. And so our brother Thomas Sankara, he took it to the point where he's not going to be dependent on France for nothing. And because he took that position and said that he wasn't going to be a puppet for them, they cut off a lot of their resources, or so-called resources, to help keep that country going. So what he decided to do was say, hey, we already in Africa. We produce everything, food, the minerals, the raw material to build and create a civilization that is just as advanced as any other Western powers, why are we still dependent on the very countries that are dependent on us and our natural goods and resources? So he took it upon himself to bring his people in and start to create their own railroads, start to create and pave their own roads, and bring their own and create their own food systems. So making them totally independent from those other nations. But what they did was create a great disdain in France, which was the country that was controlling that part of West Africa at the time, and the other bordering nations like the Ivory Coast, like Benin, who was still having puppet leaders, finding a problem because their people in their country were looking at what Thomas was doing, Thomas Sankara, and his country, as a way that they should be running their country. One of total autonomy from the Western world. And so what they did was, as he kept trying to create support and bring the other African nations together, they had an African Union meeting in 1987, in his third year in power. And this is the same year he got assassinated. He said that we've all been affected by our former colonial powers and their intent to keep us enslaved by their currency. He said, how do we come in debt to them and we're the ones that were their slaves, or we were the one who were being controlled by their Western powers, and we're paying millions and millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars each year in debt to use their currency, to use their machinery, which is being created and produced here? So it don't make no sense. He said, so right now we need to stop paying them, because there's no reason that we should continue to pay these massive debts. We don't owe them nothing. He said, if I do it as an individual, they're going to kill me. But if we unite as a continent and all of the countries step in and say, we're not going to give no more of our money or our resources or our aid to these European imperialistic powers, then we become a strong, independent, free continent again in Africa. And we can create our own United States of Africa, similar to what Gaddafi got killed for and what Kwame Nkrumah was trying to create in the 1960s and late 50s. So when you look at it like that, Thomas Sankara had a real vision for his people. But of course, they used our lust for power and greed, and his right-hand man in 1987 raided his house with some of the other soldiers and killed them. And he assumed power, and he's still in power today, and that's what we have. And they're still under, really, the hand and thumb of France. Now the story is much more detailed than that. I want you to look up on your own so you can really get the understanding of the great men that have been trailblazers for us in the past, not just here in America, but over there on the continent of Africa, but also so you can see the parallels. Because I'm saying, as we go forward, that's what type of reality we have to create for ourselves. We have to create a reality where we're totally self-sufficient and independent of the world that we know and was created to enslave and destroy our very nature. We have to get to that point. And if we don't, we're going to still continue to face the fate that we've have so far up to this point, which is just death. Or total compromise, which still ends up in death. Because you never really live a total free life. You still live one as a servant. And that's what we're going to be. A servant to the slave master that's been enslaving us since our inception here in this country, forcefully, 400 plus years ago. So as we look to this presidential election, we got to look at it in a whole nother way. Let's look at it not for voting for them, but for voting for ourselves and bringing the power back to who we are, and what really is going to make us free is total separation from this society. So we need to learn all the trades and tools and education knowledge that we've accumulated over here in this country and wherever else we've been in this world, and decide to build our own. In most cases, that's going to involve us connecting back to the mother continent, Africa, and building with those brothers over there. But they still face the same mentality that we have over here. We were made slaves and they were enslaved. in their own homeland. So sometimes they have even more devastating effects. But it's going to take those men and women who have a reality and have a mind of true knowledge of self to wake up and take the reins and unite and stop being so divisive against each other and my way or the highway, getting caught up on religions or titles or organizations, but understanding the need for us to have unity. So with that being said, we're going to end this podcast today with that. Also looking forward, I'm doing another podcast show starting this Thursday, which is going to be great. It's going to be me and another co-host where we're going to go back and forth with dialogue about exactly what's been going on in the world and the solutions that it needs to take. And we're going to have a great Discord about that. I don't want to give too much because I want you to watch it. And also coming up, we're going to do a class this Friday titled What's Next. And so whoever the president is going to outline clear and concisely what we need to do as a people going forward to ensure our salvation and our survival on this planet. So I want to thank all you guys who listen. This is our second episode of Reality Check TV. We'll be back next week. And we'll probably definitely go a little longer next week. But I had to get this one in going to election. We got so much stuff coming up. I didn't want to just overbear you with information. But there was just some key points that I wanted to touch and put out there so you can do some research and be more, I guess, knowledgeable about what's going on coming up this Tuesday. So I'll leave you in the words that I came. Peace and blessings. Alright. Where my music at? Before I get out of here. Have a great night.